it's a pleasure having you here with us today, Chad, at the Executive Room. Thank you again for joining us. And I'd love for us to start from the beginning. Could you tell us a bit about your career and a bit more about your background?
Sure. And thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you. Um, so I'm currently the CEO of Vecta Environmental, which is an industrial service firm, um, you know, working in primarily chemical plants, petrochemical industry, commercial utilities, things like that. But I started my career um, as a field chemist cleaning up Superfund sites. So I would go out to these polluted industrial sites and figure out kind of what chemicals they had there, how to get rid of them, things like that. Um, Went from that to really doing emergency response work, cleaning up, oil spills, hazmat spills, things like that. Uh, and then went from there to was a consultant on the BP oil spill that they had in the Gulf 10 or 11 years ago. Um, and just kind of worked my way up in the industry, learning all different aspects of it. In 2011, I was approached by Kenny Rouse, who was starting Vecta Environmental at the time, and Kenny and I had worked together at a previous company. He asked me if I wanted to join Vecta, and at the time, it wasn't right for me. I just recently moved to Houston. Uh, I had a new family. Had a child on the way. Had a job with insurance, and all the comforts that came from that, and the idea of joining a startup at the time, quite frankly, scared me, right? And so I, told him the timing wasn't right, but we stayed in touch. And then in 2013, uh, timing felt more right. Kenny was building something in Louisiana. He wanted to expand to Texas, and I was living in Houston. So I reached out to Kenny and said, "Hey, man, I'd love to join you now. I think I can bring something." So he and I kind of joined forces. We brought on our CFO at the time in 2013 as well, and from there we just started growing. And now we're 500 strong, and from the East Coast to kind of New Mexico, stretching out kind of along the Gulf Coast region. So it's been a fun run. It's been a long journey. Never really expected to be CEO of a large industrial company, but I'm grateful to be here.
Well, I think it's really exciting how you said, Chad, that you really started it from a startup to now being 500 people, which is an incredible feat. And, diving a little bit more into your experience at Vecta, especially today with, everything we can hear in the news and things like that. Can you share any insights into how Vecta is prepared to respond to environmental disasters, or can you share any recent things that have been going on and how Vecta has responded?
Yeah, we've helped with, there was one customer of ours had a industrial fire a few years ago, and was all over the news in Houston and along the Gulf Coast. The work we do, we work in these plants, and the work is dangerous for everyone in that vicinity and everyone in that facility, and really the surrounding population. So, customer of ours had a tank that got struck by lightning and caught on fire, and we were able to help them. Um, you know, we couldn't do anything with the fire, obviously, but as the material was being spilled, we were helping them recover it, keeping it out of waterways, putting it in another storage tank where it wouldn't, pollute the Houston ship channel, trying to reduce whatever pollution we can. Um, the when hurricanes come, we help our utility customers respond to try to get power back. We have hydro excavation services which help put power lines back in place. So no one likes those things to happen. No one sits around hoping for a hurricane or fire in a facility at all, because there's so much damage that goes along with that. But we view our role in that as helping get people back in place, right? Helping restore power lines, helping get this facility back up and running. So we're grateful that our clients trust us to be part of that process.
And it's a really important job, and one that, as you said, I think needs to be done quickly and done well. So it makes a lot of sense where your services come in.
And
Um,
safely, it's like I said, everything we do has some level of danger in it. So, we preach and teach safety all the time. So
That's a great insight, I think, in any industry, but especially in yours.
yeah.
And so now moving a little bit into the industry as a whole, one of the most talked about issues in recent years has been about wage pressures and competition in general for available workers. Have they increased as a result of the labor shortage at your company? And how is your organization responding to a lot of these current challenges?
So it certainly has affected our industry. I don't think there's an industry out there that it hasn't really affected, and ours is no exception. We've seen wages increase, some entry level wages by 30% plus, and a lot of times our customers don't want to share that burden, right? One thing is, I think us and companies in our space have seen a reduction in profit margin as a increase in labor costs. Um, but we're all fighting for the same labor pool. So what we've really focused on is we've increased our recruiting efforts, but we've really tried to focus on retention, right? Because I think the more people we can retain, the less painful it is as we struggle to recruit. So we really try to create career paths for individuals, really focused on how we can make what starts out as an entry level job a career for in the industrial service industry for people. Because once we get someone here and show them kind of our culture and what this industry can do for them and their families, it really it's a great way to make a living. Where people may view some of the work as unskilled labor, but it's really become more technical. As we've using a lot more innovation, automation, things like that. So focusing on retention, how can we make this place a place where people want to come to work and can thrive and grow their careers, has really helped us, kind of, even though we have this other struggle on this side, we're kind of focusing on the solution on how to get people in the door and then keep them there.
And do you have any one program specific that has really helped with retention?
We recently brought on, at the beginning of this year, we brought on a recruiting team, and our director of recruiting and development has worked with our HR group and created what we call the Vecta Career Academy. And it's from walking in the door, never been on an industrial site, the training that goes involved with first getting them on a job site, and then taking, how can we take that entry level person, give them the skills to where they can grow up, kind of improve their skills to become a supervisor, is kind of the first step. And then on to management training, leadership training. How can we kind of track their career path from entry level all the way to management, and all the different steps along the way. So we call that our Vecta Career Academy, and that's something we're really proud of, and we're working to develop more.
Well, that sounds like a really great initiative. And I think, we've seen other companies develop more and more of those, especially during this time with labor shortages. But I think overall, it's just one of those things that's a win-win for everyone. It's a win for the business, it's a win for the community, for the business leaders, for the team members. So it's really great to hear you share about that.
Yeah.
And now moving more into vocal leadership. So, the reason I wanted to invite you on our show, Chad, is because your LinkedIn is amazing. You post all of the time. You're super consistent. You have a great newsletter, podcast, amazing content, and it seems to work really, really well for you. So I'd love for you to share with our audience, how does this impact your business? I assume it works because I see you keep doing it, but tell us a little bit more about, how this has really impacted your entire business.
Yeah, and for me, this was not an easy thing to do, right? I'm not one who really likes being kind of in the spotlight for a lot of things or drawing attention to myself. So, meeting with you, when we met years ago, and kind of getting encouraged to do this thing, and kind of understanding the impact of it, I started posting on LinkedIn and started getting feedback from people who said they really appreciated it, right? And hey, I like what you did, and keep doing it. Things like that is very useful. Um, so, just putting myself out there and then getting feedback from people in my industry who were recognizing me, and because they recognize me, they recognize Vecta, right? And that's the whole point of it, is to really bring attention to the work that we're doing at Vecta, and also in some of my nonprofit work that I do. So, that was encouraging. So that kind of fueled me to do more, to get, to put more out there. And it's just kind of snowballed. It started out by posting, once a week, twice a week, and then doing a newsletter once a month. And then people have just kind of encouraged me to do more and more. So now I try to post pretty consistently, a few times a week. I still do my newsletter, sometimes once a month, sometimes more often. And recently, started doing a little podcast that I really need to build and spend some time building out. But I'm excited, and it's fun for me now, which used to feel like a chore, because I just knew I was going to put it out and get negative feedback, which just hasn't happened. So it's been good for me personally. It's helped me stretch kind of my comfort zone, and then also it's really helped the company, just by bringing people who recognize me from LinkedIn, then go find out what Vecta is and what Vecta does, and how we can help them in their business.
Well, that's amazing to hear. I think that, overall you are one of the people that, if any other CEO is looking to start their own plan, I think you're a great example. And it's great to hear how it has snowballed and you've been able to apply consistency to it, which is usually one of the most difficult parts for a lot of people. So around, workflow overall, could you tell us a little bit more about that? How do you work on your content? Do you keep notes on your phone? Where do your ideas come from? Do you spend a lot of time on it, a little bit of time? Any insights you can give us there?
Yeah. So I do keep notes on my phone, which is new, right? I read a lot, and work with mentors and mentees a lot, and a lot of that, those where a lot of my ideas come from. Um, most of my ideas come from conversations where someone will say something to me, or a topic will come up during conversation, and I'll just put notes on my phone, like, hey, talk about, like, I'm posting one this morning about failure and giving up, in times of struggle, because it's been something that's been going on with some people I know recently. So that's where most of my content comes from. I think um, it's I try to make it authentic. I think if I try to fabricate some idea, Google top 50 leadership topics for LinkedIn, I think it would come off like I Googled top 50 topics for leadership for LinkedIn. So that's where I try to get my ideas. They come up organically. And if I have more than one in one day, if I have a few, um, I'll record a short video, and then I'll just schedule them out. All right. The good thing about LinkedIn is you can schedule when your posts go out. So um, if I do record several in a day, then I'll just schedule them to go out, the next few days after. Um, but usually it's kind of spur of the moment. A lot of times I'll get something, if I'm on a podcast talking to someone, um, they'll send me content, and I'll just cut a snippet out of that and post it. So those are the things that I try to use. But there are also other, there are other tools you can use to get ideas, but I just try to do it kind of organically, what comes up.
That's a great insight, especially about doing it organically. I really believe that audiences can tell when something is
Yeah.
authentic or not.
Yeah.
So I think you do a fantastic job at that. Have you experimented with any of the AI tools that are out there to help you with your content, or do you have any thoughts on them overall?
I, I think it's great. I mean, I think that, um, I've used it in for some of my uh, newsletter ideas. Like, if I'm struggling with just kind of getting an outline, so this is the topic I have, these are the points I want to make, create an outline for me. Um, but then I think the writing has to be yours, right? I think that um, when people post, at least for me anyway, I can read something. I'm like, man, just doesn't feel like there's no personal touch to it. I don't want that to be what I put out there. So I think it's a useful tool for me, at least for kind of generating structure. But as far as generating content, I think that has to come from the person.
That's a great insight. I think that's one that the audience can really take with them as well. That's something we've seen in our agency as well, that AI is a great tool. It's not usually something that, can do the entire job. So I think that's, really great to hear about how you're using that as a tool.
Yeah.
So moving on to, the fact that you are such a vocal leader, how do you balance the responsibility of that with any potential risks? And have you ever ran into a situation where you did share something that could have been a bit controversial? How do you manage overall any situations like that?
Yeah, it can be touchy, right? I'm a vocal advocate for anti-racism and DEI initiatives. I work with the Center for the Healing of Racism in Houston. I've worked with some organizations in New Orleans, um, and the sad reality is not everyone shares those values, right? Um, and sometimes the reality is sometimes in my industry people will say things assuming because I'm a middle-aged white guy that I share their values of another middle-aged white, right? Um, and sometimes you have to balance speaking up and telling this person how you feel with the impact to your business, right? I was years ago. This happened years ago. I was on a golf course with a customer who said something that was racially problematic, right? Um, and it was a customer, and we weren't 500 strong at that time. We probably had a handful of customers, right? And losing one customer was painful, and I try to be delicate about it and say, look, I don't share those values, and just left it at that. And luckily that was enough. Um, but it is, um, it can be hard, but I think it's important for me to not compromise my values, right? I won't sacrifice my values in pursuit of monetary gain, which ultimately that's what that boils down to. Um, but there are also, I don't necessarily think LinkedIn is the best place for people to argue about politics, right? So I don't try to generate that kind of content on LinkedIn. To me, LinkedIn is a professional networking site, and I try to create topics that are meaningful to that area. And if you want to talk politics, go to Twitter or Facebook or whatever. But um, I try to create content I don't avoid the topic, but I also don't try to create controversy.
I think that's a great insight and one that really shows you are committed to your values. And when we do see leaders like that overall, we usually see that, it influences even their entire organization. So I'm sure that a lot of your team members and employees also appreciate having a leader that does take a stand. So if you are going to give advice to another CEO who, may right now be someone who's a little bit more in the background, isn't, actively online, isn't developing their presence, what advice would you give them before they get started on a plan?
First, I would find someone that you trust and value, um, and try to work with them. Right there are people out there like yourself, Kimberly, who help people with their LinkedIn profiles and their professional profile, right? Overall, not just LinkedIn, but other areas. If you can afford it, if you have the time and energy to invest in that, I would certainly say do that. All right. Another thing I would do is look for people whose content you enjoy or find value in, see what they're doing, and see if you could do not the same thing, but the same types of things. If this person is posting, if they're writing articles, then see if there's an article you could write. Video was a big step for me just because I'm so uncomfortable in front of a camera. Uh, but if you're comfortable doing that, do that. The reality is the payoff, the people who work with you and for you want to see more of you, right? They they're working with you and for you for a reason. They trust you, so they want to see more of you. And it's just another way to reach those people, right? And if you view it that way as an initial step, it's easier to take that first step. And then, I do believe that once you take that first step, it gets easier. And then, like it happened with me, it does snowball and lead you to other things. But, um, I think people who are successful have been uncomfortable at points in their career, and it's an opportunity to be uncomfortable again, but in service of, your company and the people who work with you and for you.
Great value there.
Yeah.
And moving on to your give back initiatives, as you said, you are, co-founder of Second Story Project, a consulting firm for companies to address diversity and inclusion challenges. What has been the most satisfying experience in that new venture, and where did the inspiration for it come from?
So I'll take the second part first. The inspiration came. Um, it really came about during the protests following the murder of George Floyd. Uh, and I was watching this, what felt like anyway on TV, the country being torn apart in two different directions, and people on one side screaming at, screaming their values, and screaming on the other side screaming theirs, and no one was talking to each other, just shouting at each other. And I reached out to a friend of mine who's a therapist in Houston, and I asked him, so what, because I work with the Center for the Healing of Racism, I reached out to him and said, hey, can we create a workshop that gets beyond talking and it gets people into action, right? And he said quite simply, he said, let's do something bigger. So we really started talking then, and came up with this concept of the Second Story Project, to really bring people together. Because the way we view it is, it's easy for me to get caught up in my story and my what I believe, and tell you why you're wrong, and then you sit and get caught up in your story and what you believe and tell me why I'm wrong. But if we stop and take the time to listen and really appreciate each other's stories, right? Appreciate where you come from, why you believe what you do. Don't have to agree with you, but acknowledge that that's your reality. And if you can acknowledge mine, from that place, we can co-create a second story that works for both of us, right? So that's why we call it the Second Story Project. And we've been able to take that into a few organizations, and it's just rewarding to hear the people that we work with. One of the comments we got back is, we've tried the kind of online DEI training, but it just felt like we were checking a box. But this is the first time we've actually really talked to each other and listened to each other. Similarly, someone said this is the first time we've had a real conversation about this in our company. So, and then, another company took, we worked with them for a period of 6 months, and then they've taken it on, and now they have their own, DEI initiatives, and they're building a whole culture around, part of some of the groundwork that we laid with them. So it's been really rewarding. It's one day down the line, I'll have more time to make that, even more part of what I do. But it really is rewarding to work with people who really want to have these difficult conversations in order to bring people together.
And it seems like from what you said, Chad, that you're taking it from perhaps these organizations were very surface level D&I training in the past, and you're really moving past the surface. I'm sure that potentially it could be uncomfortable at times, but those are where the real breakthroughs happen.
Absolutely. It is uncomfortable because you have to get vulnerable to have these conversations, right? You have to open yourself up. And that's not easy, especially in a work environment where it's not usually, usually at work, it's protected. We're going to do everything on the surface to not cause trouble. We don't want to have these difficult conversations. I don't want them in my organization, right? And I understand that, because it is dangerous, right? It does, it's for an organization, things could get brought up that they cause disconnection between people. But because the people I work with are therapists, and I come from a more of a business operational background, I understand the business side of it, but the therapists really understand how to facilitate these conversations to where we can have difficult conversations and people can listen to each other, and not really, like I said, we start from a place of maybe you're both right, right? Maybe if once you explain why you believe what you believe, it's not a matter of who's right and who's wrong. This is just where we are. Now, how can we come together, right? Um, so it's uncomfortable. The conversation, there's no way getting around. But to do any real growth, Kimberly, I think you have to get uncomfortable. I think that comfort and growth don't necessarily go well together.
Completely. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Absolutely,
Maybe a way to put it. So
absolutely.
those were all really great insights, Chad. Thank you so much for sharing all of them. To wrap up, I'd love to hear what's your biggest piece of advice for another CEO who may be starting their journey to become a vocal leader tomorrow?
Yeah, I would say, the two things I would say are really stick true to your values, right? Don't try to be something you're not. Don't try to create a message that's not true to you. Stick to your values, and then, you know, back to being uncomfortable. Be willing to be uncomfortable in order to grow your brand, but more importantly, to help your company grow. Because I think that's why most of us are doing it, is to really to impact. And then as your company grows, the people who work with you and for you will benefit. So if you tie your goals to something bigger than yourself, you have a much better chance of success.
Well, thank you so much, Chad, for being on. Really inspirational, such great insights. And thanks again.
Thank you, Kimberly. I really enjoyed it. Good seeing you.